This is Spencer Dutton, and this is his older brother, John Dutton. If you don't remember him, don't worry, you're not alone. He died in Season 1, Episode 3 of 1923, in a scene that now feels like a distant memory. 2 real-world years have passed, and yet his death still haunts fans of the Dutton saga. But what if everything you thought you knew about this family was wrong? What if Elsa Dutton's haunting opening speech, the one that shaped the entire story, has been misunderstood from the start? This changes everything. And it might mean tragedy is barreling toward Alexandra like a runaway train. This is Spencer Dutton, and this is his older brother, John Dutton, who you can be forgiven for forgetting about, because he died in Season 1, Episode 3, during this scene. Man, that was more than 2 real-world years ago. Fans of 1883 and 1923 know the Duttons also had an older sister, Elsa, who's been narrating this show. She died 40 Yellowstone years ago, which at first felt strange, but somehow it just started to work. We all moved on. But I want to rewind things for a moment, to zoom in on Elsa's most important line of dialogue. She said something at the very start of this series, back in December 2022, that has become the cornerstone for everything that followed, except I think we got it wrong. And that changes what we expect from Spencer Dutton and Alexandra, especially going into Episode 5, titled Only Gunshots to Guide Us. More on that shortly. Drop your thoughts below or head to tasteofcountry.com if you want to join the conversation, because by the end of this video, I'll be sharing some of your most mind-blowing questions, comments, and conspiracy theories. One in particular left my Dutton Rules podcast co-host Addison Hager speechless. But first, Elsa gives us the map. My father had 3 children. Only one would live to see their own children grow. Only one would carry the fate of this family through the Depression and every other hell the 20th century hurled at them. This is a core statement. Her father, of course, is James Dutton, played by Tim McGraw. He had 3 children, as we know. But Elsa says only one would live long enough to see their own children grow. That would be John Dutton, who has an older son named Jack. However, the next line, only one would carry the fate of this family through the Depression, can't be John, because he's dead. So, that means it must be Spencer. He's the one who lives long enough to carry the family through the Depression. But here's the issue. Spencer doesn't have children. And yet, many believe he becomes the father of Dabney Coleman's John Dutton because of this very speech. That's why Alex's pregnancy, and the looming possibility she lost the baby, is so compelling and so confusing. We see her at the start of Episode 4, getting mugged by the Alabaster Man. Were you the one left? I was robbed. What? Did he take? He took everything. What if we misunderstood Elsa's speech? Listen again. My father had 3 children. Only one would live to see their own children grow. Only one would carry the fate of this family through the Depression and every other hell the 20th century hurled at them. Nowhere does she say those 2 only ones are the same person. That changes the entire meaning. What if one sibling, John, lived long enough to see his children grow and another sibling, Spencer, lived long enough to carry the family through the Great Depression? I always assumed Elsa meant one person did both. But the deeper we go into this saga, the less that makes sense. Especially because Alex seems to think she lost the baby just seconds after the attack. And let's be real, a love story as tender as Spencer and Alex's? That's too good to be true in a Taylor Sheridan drama. Just ask Elsa and Sam from 1883. If Alex did lose the baby, then all hopes shift to Elizabeth's unborn child. But that, too, is hanging by a thread. Will it be born safely? Big maybe. And we will find out more this week. In fact, it's very likely things are only going to get worse for Alexandra. And that's not just speculation. Actor Julia Schleifer told TV Line that Alex hasn't hit the worst of it. You can find our full interview with Julia linked below. She even told the Dutton Rules podcast an incredible Harrison Ford story that still has us laughing. As for Alex, she's slowly making her way to Montana, where, in a perfect world, she'll reunite with Spencer, who is also traveling by train. At least he was, because in this world, everybody's gotta pay. Even you? Not me. What makes you so special? I'm the tax collector. I love this scene. And yes, I finally figured out who played the tax collector. His name is Isaac, and he's portrayed by actor Micah Fitzgerald. Here he is on set with Brandon Sklenar. Feel that steel till your neck down. I don't care how fast you think you are. You ain't that fast. Yeah, that doesn't go well. For him, this might be a relatively slow Spencer episode, until the very end. He's likely to finally meet up with Marshall Mephosheth. That trailer shot I've been leaning on for weeks? I think we're finally going to see it. My big, bold prediction? By the end of this week's episode, Spencer will cross paths with this woman. This week's poll question was, do you think Spencer and Tiana will finally meet? Nearly 80% of you said absolutely. Quote from a Shawan this. Hasn't that been the plotline from the start? Maybe. But it really came into focus when Spencer landed in Galveston. That's when we realized he's retracing his father James Dutton's path north to Montana. Tiana, meanwhile, has been near Amarillo. But now, her poster is everywhere. It's time for her to hit the road. All signs suggest Marshall Mephosheth is also about to cross paths with Tiana. And given how deeply skeptical she is of Kent and Father Renault's plans, and given Spencer's clear desire to protect the marginalized, you can see why people think these two characters will meet. My even bolder prediction? Spencer shows up just in time to save Tiana's life. He may even kill Father Renault. I fear for Pete. I fear Tiana's father, riding his horse so desperately, may not make it. But Tiana has to get to Mexico. Why? Because that's where Thomas Rainwater's ancestors came from. And for a good part of his life, he believed he was Mexican. Tiana's last name? Rainwater. Quick sidebar. If my theory plays out, look at the enemies Spencer's made. The Texas Mafia, a Fort Worth sheriff, the Catholic Church, U.S. Marshals. This guy has a lot of enemies. Next up, Q&A, and one incredibly dark and popular theory about what's coming for Alexandra. Not going to spoil it yet, but it almost makes too much sense. Last week we were introduced to the concept of the train station. That's right. They recorded a county with no township. All of it still owned by the government. A county with a population of 0. No judge, no sheriff, which means no crime. This week, we're almost guaranteed to see the first body thrown from the edge. It's Dawn's sex slave, Christy, wrapped up and rolling down the hill. Expect the slow squeeze Whitfield is putting on the Duttons to intensify. This week. In fact, I think we're on the brink of war. Every Thursday we answer your best questions, comments, and conspiracy theories sent below or to staff@tasteofcountry.com. My Dutton Rules podcast co-host Addison Hager joins me for that. And today, who's up first, Addison? Alrighty. First one's from Jerry on X, who says, I think Alex will be Whitfield's next new girl to replace the dead one. Oof. That's dark. But he's not alone. Michelle on YouTube said the same thing. In fact, it's becoming one of the leading conspiracy theories. Alex being trafficked into Montana. Lindy's got to go into town to find a replacement girl, Whitfield told her to. What if those paths intersect? The challenge is, Alex is headed to Billings. Lindy's presumably in Bozeman. That's a fair distance apart. So, I don't know. That their paths will cross. But I do think there's going to be some sort of Whitfield-Alex connection. I'm not saying I believe it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. Because in the Yellowstone universe, the worst isn't behind you, it's always up ahead. The wind that swept across the Montana plains carried the scent of dust and sorrow. Jack Dutton stood at the edge of the pasture, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun melted into the mountains. The sky was awash of amber and blood, and in its haunting beauty, it felt like a eulogy written for all they'd lost. Behind him, the ranch was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that follows a storm, or the kind that signals another one brewing. His heart still bore the weight of Spencer's departure. That final embrace in the yard played in his memory like a ghost refusing to leave. Spencer had chosen the frontier, the war, the wilderness. And Jack had stayed behind. He'd married Elizabeth, stepped into the Dutton name like a saddle that never quite fit, and tried to be the man the land needed. But the ache never left. Not just the ache of loss, but the ache of absence. of a brother torn away by the cruelty of fate. Elizabeth watched him from the porch, her hands resting over her belly. She was with child now. New life taking root, in a house still grieving the past. Her face had changed in the months since the miscarriage, softer, sadder, wiser. There were nights she'd weep without sound, curled beneath quilts stitched by hands long dead, and Jack would hold her but never know what to say. There was no healing a wound that deep, not with words. Only time, and even that had become an untrustworthy ally. "I saw Cara out by the creek this morning," Elizabeth said gently, stepping beside him. She was talking to herself again, or maybe to God. Hard to say which. Jack nodded. Cara had never stopped praying for Spencer, for news, for hope. Even after the army stopped writing. Even after months of silence stretched into a year. Even after Jacob's death left a crater in the ranch and Banner Whitfield's war finally ended in blood. "She doesn't know how to stop waiting," Jack whispered. "Do any of us?" Elizabeth replied, her eyes misting, their hands brushed. There was warmth between them still, but it was buried under the weight of unspoken things. The future, the fear, the ghosts of what might have been. Miles away, across oceans and deserts, Spencer Dutton stood on the deck of a transport ship, staring into the black waves. The war had changed him, hardened him, stripped him of the reckless charm that once defined his smile. His face was etched with scars, some visible, most not. He carried a photograph folded in his coat. Alex's face, creased but unbroken, smiling back at him like a promise he refused to surrender. He'd spent months in Africa chasing danger, chasing purpose, chasing the memory of his brother John. But nothing filled the void. The battles blurred together, the lions, the gunfire, the dust, until one day, in a jungle soaked with rain and regret, he realized that he wasn't running from grief. He was running from home, from the place where pain had a name, where every fence post and river stone whispered of family and failure. And so, he had made a choice. Return. Not just to Montana, but to the part of himself he had buried beneath years of guilt and rage. The telegram arrived on a gray morning. Cara held the paper with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words over and over, as if repetition might make it more real. "Sailing from Marseille, will arrive in New York by month's end. Coming home." "Spencer!" she gasped. The sound tore from her throat like a prayer finally answered. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and wild, as she collapsed into the wooden chair by the stove. For a long time, she said nothing, just sat in silence, the letter pressed to her heart. When Jack found her, she could only smile and nod, her lips barely able to form the words. "He's coming back." The news spread across the ranch like fire in dry grass. Hope bloomed again, cautiously, like flowers in frost. The men whispered it in the bunkhouse. Elizabeth wept in Jack's arms, her hands cradling the small swell of life inside her. Even the cattle seemed to lift their heads higher, as if sensing the return of something long lost. The train ride from New York to Bozeman was long and cold. Spencer kept to himself, his thoughts circling like hawks. He carried only a duffel, worn and frayed, filled with reminders of war and survival. Every mile westward was a mile closer to reckoning. He wondered what Jack would say, if Elizabeth would look at him the same, if the land would still recognize his boots on its soil. When the train finally pulled into the station, the platform was nearly empty. But there they were. Cara in her black coat, her face etched with the pain and pride of a mother who had never stopped believing. Jack, standing taller than Spencer remembered, with Elizabeth by his side and a child in her arms, red-cheeked and swaddled in wool. Spencer stepped off the train and froze. The silence was deafening. And then, Cara ran to him. She didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around his chest and held him like she'd never let go. Spencer buried his face in her shoulder and wept for the first time in years. Jack followed, a breath caught in his throat, unsure of what to say. But it didn't matter. Spencer looked at him, eyes red but clear, and Jack simply nodded. It wasn't forgiveness or apology. It was something older. Brotherhood reforged not by words, but by presence. Elizabeth stepped forward, The baby nestled close. "This is Jacob," she said softly. "We named him after your uncle. He was born 2 months ago." Spencer's eyes widened. The child reached for him without fear, tiny fingers grasping air. Spencer smiled through tears. "Hello, little cowboy," he whispered. Back at the ranch, things felt different. War had changed him, yes, but home changed him more. He walked the fields with Jack, repaired fences with the ranch hands, and spent long hours in the barn whispering to the horses like old friends. The land welcomed him in silence, as if it had always been waiting, but healing was never linear. Some nights, Spencer still woke screaming. Elizabeth would find him on the porch, breath ragged, hands shaking. She'd sit beside him, offering neither comfort nor questions, just presence. And that was enough. Cara took to cooking again, humming old Gaelic tunes in the kitchen. The house filled with warmth that had been missing since Jacob's funeral. The fireplace glowed brighter. The walls felt less like tombstones. And the child, Jacob, grew quickly. He loved Spencer fiercely, clung to his leg, followed him around, the ranch with wide eyes and endless curiosity. "You came back," the boy would say. "You didn't forget us." "No, little man," Spencer would whisper. "Never." Seasons changed. Snow melted into spring. The fields turned green again. The ranch lived, and so did they. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, became a scar rather than an open wound. They talked more, laughed more. Jack and Spencer began working side by side, the old tensions dissolving like mist under sun. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Spencer stood with Jack by the old tree near the river. The same tree they used to climb as boys. "Never thanked you," Spencer said. "For what?" "For holding the ranch, for holding the family, for being stronger than I ever was." Jack shook his head. "You think strength is never leaving? It isn't. Sometimes, strength is coming back. And you did." Spencer nodded. The wind rustled the leaves above them. "Let's build something. Better, Jack. For the next Duttons. For Jacob. For the ones we've lost." Jack clapped a hand on his shoulder. Together. And so, under the wide Montana sky, the Duttons began again. Not by forgetting the past, but by carrying it forward, with love, grit, and hope. Because home isn't where the hurt ends, it's where healing begins.